Dr. Mary Lippitt join us this evening. For over 30 years, she has been the president of Enterprise Management, call it an awesome, trying to find the right words here, an awesome consulting and training firm, originally based in the Washington, D.C. area, but now based in the Tampa Bay, St. Petersburg area. In addition to her company, she's also been a faculty member at both the University of South Florida and the University of Florida, and holds a doctorate in business management from Nova Southeastern University. She is an author with a new book out called Situational Mindsets. Got connected with her via our friend Teresa Hummel-Kralinger, who said, you need to have Mary come and work with your group. So, and she's also a former past president of ATD's Washington, D.C. chapter. So Mary knows the life that Josh and I lead. So we're really excited to have her this evening. So Mary, without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to you. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen momentarily so I can switch out to your presentation. So Mary, thanks for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, John. It's a pleasure to be with all of you, and I look forward to offering something that might trigger some thoughts. I think it's always a challenge to talk to people and try to add something when the people already have so many skills. So I hope that you find this something that you could say, yeah, I learned something tonight, that it was a valuable investment of your time. So I'm going to be talking about boosting critical thinking and mental agility. And the first thing I'd like to say is that I'm using the term critical thinking externally. So usually when people think about critical thinking, they're thinking about it internally. When you meet somebody, you may critically think about them. But that's not what we're talking about, because that's judgment about a person. And all of our conversation tonight is going to be externally focused. So we're not going to be talking about characteristics or styles or competencies or value systems or those kinds of things. We're going to be talking about an individual's ability to read the environment and make smart choices. So that's where we're going tonight. It's a little bit different than normal. So let's take a look at the goals that we have for tonight. I'm going to talk about situational mindsets, and I'm going to look at it in terms of improving the ability to ascertain what we need to do to be successful. I'm going to talk about it very specifically in terms of a situational checklist, because again, I'm trying to bring it down to a practical level. I like theory, but if we can't give something practical, then we don't have the impact that we want to have. So one of the ways we're going to do that is looking at it in terms of an executive team case study. So we'll actually put it to use. So let's get started and take a look at the next slide. And this is just going to be a whiteboard or a chat feature. If you had to guess or estimate or use your expertise, determine what percentage of organizational decisions are both high quality and offered in a timely fashion, what percentage would you suggest is positive?
And you can drop those comments in chat. If you don't know, just click on, bring up the Zoom bar at the bottom of the screen, click on the chat button to open up the chat.
Well, we've got a good variety so far. We've got 5% to 60%, and the lot around 15 to 20%. Anybody else want to make a contribution? Another 5, okay, okay. Well, what's really interesting is, this is a research project that was done by McKinsey, and so let's take a look at the results on the next slide. What we found out was that 37% said there was high quality decision making in their organization. What was also interesting to me was that a study of the board of directors, they studied 1,500 board of director members, and 21% said they didn't understand their environment. And here they are on the board of directors, and they have, 21% said they don't understand what's going on around them. And I think that is something that probably needs to be addressed. So let's take a look at what we can do about it. I'm going to ask you to get involved. It's not going to take a whole lot, but first I'd like to ask you to point to a distant object in your room. So or office or wherever you are, and just point to a distant object with both of your eyes open. Okay, now next, what I'd like to ask you to do is to close your right eye and see where you're pointing. And then close your left eye and see where you're pointing. And you'll notice it jumps, correct? I mean, other people have that experience, right? And this is to show that you have a dominant eye. And what I'm trying to do with this short exercise is to show how quickly we can overlook information, because we saw a different destination with the right eye as we saw with the left eye. And when we combine them, again, we overlooked something. And that's where I'm coming from. I'm talking about how do we make sure that we don't overlook something. So that's where I'm going. I'm going to be talking about perspective, or the lens that you're using. So let's just do a couple of short definitions of how I'm using these terms. I'm going to use the term critical thinking, not to be negative. Again, the word critical, sometimes people think is negative, but I'm going to use it to mean a collective analysis of a situation, an environment, a condition, a circumstance. And it's to make sure that we really see all aspects. What we have as a society historically has been a society that wants to judge quickly. If you give me a question, I have to have an answer right away. And what I'm trying to suggest is that when things are changing rapidly, when we have ambiguous information, when we're making precedent-setting decisions, we really have to engage in critical thinking. And yet it's not comfortable for us. Just like the dominant view, it's easier if my choices are so limited that I can make a decision right away. There used to be something called get ready, aim, fire, but most of our leaders are, get ready and fire. Who wants to aim? Let's just do it kind of thing. So I'm talking about critical thinking and how it contributes to the next definition, which is mental agility. And the definition of mental agility is a willingness to pivot, a willingness to listen to diverse perspectives, and by the way, solicit them. So what we're doing, we're going to be talking about data, but we're doing it in a very engagement, inclusive, respectful point of view, because we're not talking just about one person changing his or her point of view. We're talking about the ability to collect all that information, which means I ask people questions of how they're reading their environment, what's important to me, all those kinds of things, which basically shows respect for me, which involves me, which it has a sense that I'm really a contributor to the organization. So I'm going to be talking about mental agility as a positive and something that we really need to be taking giving much more attention to. And it is going to be focusing on objective analysis because, we're saying that we have to cope with change. I don't think I'm alone. If I told you in January, I would never have believed that in May, we would have closed down our companies, our businesses, those kinds of things. I have been surprised by events, and I've had to adjust like you've had to adjust to those new realities. So what we're going to be talking about on the next slide, please, is have we experienced organizations where they haven't done a good job of critical thinking? So let me give you an example. There's an aircraft manufacturer that has developed a brand new plane where there's high customer demand, but it's very expensive. So they decided to make their safety package an add-on cost. If you were thinking critically about this situation, what questions would you ask? Anyone? Do we have some, let me just open the chat box. Anyone think of a question that you would want to ask of this aircraft manufacturer? Okay, how much? Okay, what's our past offering? Why? Also, maybe, what's the risk? And for some people might have identified this aircraft manufacturer as a company named Boeing.
Yes.
And they felt that they could get more sales if they kept the price more reasonable. But I would say that the price that they've paid in terms of their brand, in terms of the regulations, in terms of the fines, in terms of the plane delays and having to get recertified. Now, I'm not trying to say that the software package is the only thing. There were other things involved. But I'm just trying to point out to you that very talented, very competent leaders can sometimes make a mistake by being narrowly focused only on one thing. Again, we have to get focused eventually, but we have to start with a broad understanding of our situation. So let's take a look at one more situation, please. We have a situation where a consumer products company is offering a brightly colored laundry detergent product that is approximately 2 inches square and is designed for home use. What questions would you ask if you were doing a critical analysis? If somebody just wants to speak up, that's fine, or you can type it out, whatever your preference is.
Who is our target audience?
Sure. This is Tide Pods.
Right.
And what I'm trying to again saying is, would it have been better if they had thought about this ahead of time and maybe altered their packaging earlier? And I would, again, I'm no product expert, but I would say yes. So what we're talking about here is a whole new approach really to saying slow down so you could go faster later. It's really interesting. People tell me I don't have time for critical thinking. What I would say is it's interesting you don't have time to do it ahead of time, but you always have time to fix it later because you didn't do a good job first. So that's my argument. I'm going to just be real clear in terms of that's my focal point. What I'd also like to suggest is I'd like to have a breakout group and ask you from your experience, because you all have tremendous experience, what are the practices or biases that you think might limit people's willingness to pivot or have mental agility? Or you could also suggest the practices, if you don't want to be on the negative side, which is the first question, you can look at the practices that boost critical thinking on the positive side. And what I'm going to ask John to help me with is to set up some breakout groups. I'm going to ask that you spend about 8 minutes, just identify the negative, what stops us from critical thinking and mental agility, and what can boost it. So that's the question. There are 2 questions. What are the biases? What are the boosters? So 2 Bs.
Okay, so we are going to break you guys out into breakout rooms. We've got probably going to set up 4 rooms here. Once I click the button, it will be automatic and will automatically assign you into a group. So please have the discussion. We will give you a 1-minute warning before we bring you back.
You're going to have to hit the join button to make sure you join the breakout group.
Yeah. If you've not experienced breakout rooms in Zoom before, when we do bring you back, it will be automatic. So we'll give you a minute warning. So again, we'll also drop the questions in chat in case you need them. But again, question 1: what practices or biases limit mental agility? And question 2: what practices help boost critical thinking? So if everyone's ready, we'll start creating the rooms in 3, 2, 1, here we go. Are you guys in the breakout rooms?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Did the pop-up?
No
I
pop.
did not see a pop-up.
We did not see a pop-up.
Okay.
John,
I'm sorry, Josh.
you transfer host to me, I can do it.
I mean, I started it, but because it's telling me what rooms you guys should be in.
You have to actually launch them.
No, I thought I did.
There may be a parallel timeline where we are already there.
Ooh, that's deep. But John, if you're not sure, just, yeah, there it is. All right.
Yeah, I'll give you controls.
Yeah, and how many, I dropped off for a minute. How many people per room are we doing?
Set up like 4 rooms.
All right. And how long did we say?
8 minutes?
8?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, here we go. Hey, there's still no, oh, that's the time I've been on is 2 minutes.
I closed all the breakout rooms. I hit the button.
People have 30 seconds to come back.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Yeah, I have to play around with this more. So.
Well,
All right.
can we do just a quick recap of some ideas about what limits critical thinking and mental agility? We came up in our breakout room with the idea of the recency requirement, you know, the sense of what we've done recently. There's another term for it. It was in the Hawthorne studies. I forgot what they called it. The halo effect of, you know, that can impact our willingness to think differently. What else came up in your breakout rooms?
Feel free to go off mute and speak up.
I guess a couple of things. Thinking that you know, everybody thinks alike, and we make that assumption. Also, that we look at groups of people and we think that people from the same group think alike, like all men think alike or all women think alike.
Yeah.
Not pulling out a lot of, not getting enough information from the emails that we're sending out. And Sarah, if you want to elaborate on that, I'd love that, because I thought that was very well founded. Sarah was in our group.
Yeah, hi. I know I was just mentioning that, you know, when you ask a question via email with, well, at least with some of my colleagues, I would get a one-line answer. If it was a yes or a no, they don't go on to explain why it's a yes or a no. And so I think that sometimes that's sort of limiting, and they're not thinking about the bigger picture of, you know, if you provided a little bit more detail, it might help me make a better decision or move forward with the project. So that's where we were going with that. The other thing our group mentioned too, we were talking about, is when you fall in love with your idea and you cannot see past that, and the critique of your idea is very personal. And so, you know, I think we all have experienced something like that, where someone doesn't want to change and they continue to plow forward with their idea, and then it becomes a mess at the end.
Yeah, I call that the enthusiasm, and you say falling in love, you know, and I think the other thing that happens is that once you mention it, I just use your name for a second, if it's Sarah's idea, then Sarah can never move off of it, because that it's sort of like she owns it and she can't make adjustments. So, you know, that I think is a limitation also. Anyone else?
Yeah, our group talked a lot about work groups and, you know, the culture of the group and how that can affect things. If you have kind of a culture of fear, sometimes that will inhibit someone speaking up, or, you know, if someone, you know, might not know enough about the topic and they're afraid to speak up because they're afraid that they'll look ignorant or things like that, that can really affect things.
Yeah, there was a book by J. Irving Janis called Victims of Groupthink, which basically talks about this fact that I'm afraid of being excluded from the group because I have a different view. So I'll just go along with the group and hope that everybody agrees. And I think that the expediency thing about an email response, you know, it's easy just to say what first comes to mind and get that email off your list, unless, again, there's more of a challenge to it. Saying, I'm thinking of doing this, but I really need to think this through. There are probably ramifications I haven't thought of. What do you think we should also consider? So unless you put a little bit more effort into the request to show that it's really safe, you know, somebody may not feel comfortable spending their time to think it through, or feeling comfortable enough to actually make the offer of a different idea. Did anything else come up? Okay, I think I mentioned in our group that there's this, again, a desire for speed and to look impressive. If you give me a problem, as a good leader, I should have that fast answer. So expediency, of course, is another issue. But there's another one that I'd like to share with you, and that's on our next slide, which is taking a look at the fact that what we tend to do, because of the desire for speed, is to basically try to combine collecting the information with evaluating it. So, I mean, some of you have a water faucet that, you know, that combines hot and cold water, and some of us have water faucets that have different knobs. And what we're trying to do here is collect the data and at the same time say, hey, I'm so smart, I can already evaluate it while I'm collecting it. And the reality is that there are more variables that we have today than ever before. And we really need to focus on scanning for that environmental factors and do that as a separate process, and make sure that we collected all the information, we solicited from all the people, not just people at our level, not just people in our silo, but all the people that are involved, all the stakeholders. And before we try to turn it into information, and before we try to actually set a priority. So we have to be broad before we become narrow. We can't do everything at the same time. We used to have something called faster, cheaper, better, where somebody would tell you, I want things done faster, cheaper, better. And we know if we do it faster, it may not be cheaper, it may not be better. We have to make sure that when we do the environmental scan, that we actually take the time to weigh out what we need to do first. And a lot of organizations used to have 5-year plans. Utilities, I think, used to have 30-year plans. But what's really interesting now is we need to be much more agile. And I don't think that too many companies could come up with a solid 5-year plan right now. There's just too much, in my mind, in flux for an organization to do that. So what I would like to just suggest is that we really need to do a better job of taking a look at the whole environment first. And so this is where I'm going to introduce the term situational mindset. And I know that most of us know the situational mindset that was developed by Carol Dweck, who was one of the first individuals who started to use the term mindset. But she uses it particularly in terms of our internal opinion about whether I can learn and grow. So she talked about 2 mindsets. One, that I'm fixed. You know, you can't teach old dogs new tricks, or a growth mindset, which says I can continually learn. So I'm using the term mindset not in that personal context at all, but in a situational mindset point of view. So let me define what it is. First, it's a filter or a bucket to collect information. So just like we had a right and left eye, we don't have just 2 filters anymore for our organizations. We need to have quite a few more. So secondly, it's a snapshot in time. It is not a permanent reality. It's not saying this is how we're always going to be for the next year, 6 months, or whatever. This is what's happening right now, because things are dynamic. And most of our leadership work has really been around more stable aspects of leadership. So my value system tends to be stable. My characteristics tend to be stable. My style, I can modify some, but it takes a while. And then, of course, my skill sets I can learn, but it usually isn't real fast. It does require some effort. So what situational mindsets is trying to do is that talk about the importance of collecting objective facts. Again, this is not looking at subjective internal things about what are my motivations or agendas or those kinds of things. I'm looking at objective facts. I'm focusing more on external realities than my internal reality. And by external reality, I mean both organizational culture, organizational aspects, systems, processes, practices, norms, but I'm also looking external to the organization. What is happening with my customer base, what is happening in the economy, what is happening in health situations. So I'm looking externally for data. And again, what I come up with in terms of my priority is a temporary point of view. So when I'm talking about something that's very different than Dweck is talking about, I mean, we need both, obviously, but we need to actually have a willingness to look at a situation from a different perspective. So I'm going to give you a chance to actually practice this. On the next slide, please. I'm going to ask you to identify what you see initially. What do you see?
A horse.
A horse. Now what do you see? A frog. So what we have is that people can see the same reality differently. They have a different perspective. And I'm not going to say that one answer, if you first answered frog, I'm not going to say to you, well, how come you don't see the horse? You're crazy, or the other way around. I have to say, what You said frog. What do you see? What is it what is the information that you took in that made you say frog? Or what is the information that I took in that made me see horse? So again, I have to start with an accepting that somebody could see the same thing I see, but see it differently. Actually, one of my favorite things to talk about, actually, because what we really need to do is to take a look at how we do view things. So I'm going to, again, try to bring it back to a practical example. I'm going to ask on the next slide for you to read the situation. And the situation is your hypothetical organization is having financial problems and is missing deadlines. And because of that, you know, we're not doing the sales, we're not getting the return on revenue, all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to ask, what would you do first from these 6 alternatives? The first alternative is to determine what new products or services need to be developed. The second alternative is to analyze how to gain new customers and retain your current customers. The third option is going to be consider what internal systems might need to be revamped or changed or altered. The next alternative is to evaluate how to improve productivity, quality, and efficiency. Another alternative is to consider how to develop employees' talent and retention. And the final choice is to search for new alliances to prepare for the future. And I'd like to tell you that every one of these alternatives is a great alternative. This is not like choosing between I contribute to charity or I abuse animals. All of these are good. So I'd like you to think about the situation. You've got financial problems. You've got 6 alternatives. Which one would you tackle first from this list of 6? You don't have to say it out loud. I just want you to remember the letter. So would you look down that list and say, in that situation, what would you do first? Does anybody want more time? Okay, let's look at a second situation. In this situation, your organization has very strong sales and a great profit margin. They're doing even better than their budget. So you're asked to take some action. What would you do first? And it's the same 6 alternatives. So in this situation, things are going well with sales. Things are going well with revenue. What would you do first? Would you pick a letter, please? Does anyone need more time? Okay, so I'm going to do a request you just to answer the next question that's a poll. It's not a very complicated one. It's asking you to, on the next slide, to choose one. Did you select the same letter each time, or did you select different letters? Would you pick one of those 2 answers, please? Okay. We got 11 folks responding. Sounds pretty good. Last chance, we're going to end the polling. Okay, let's end the polling. We have 75% of our respondents suggesting we choose a different letter each time. Why would somebody want to just unmute themselves and just tell me what they were thinking?
Based on the discussion, I thought, oh, they should be the same, but they didn't make sense to pick the same one. So that's why I picked a different one.
Okay. And anyone else want to express why they wanted to pick the same one?
I think I've heard that people are much more worried about bad stuff than they are about good stuff. So they, losing anything is dire and requires serious questioning and thought. And When times are good, you know, hey, it's good. Let's not break it or whatever.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Huh?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm just suggesting that we do have choices, and I think those choices need to be based on what is happening in the organization. So again, that's my premise. There's actually, what I do is I have a situational mindsets inventory where people take it based on one task, one assignment. So they get to feel comfortable with the 6 mindsets. And let me share the 6 mindsets with you on the next slide. One of the mindsets talks about developing new products, creative design, and internal synergies. How can we work better creatively inside? So there are companies that really focus on being new products. And since Apple's getting ready to announce their new products, I could maybe mention Apple's name in this regard. And you have, by the way, you have an organizational mindset priority, but sometimes there are mindset priorities in different units. Have you ever noticed that R&D is rarely located next to headquarters or part of headquarters? They're usually off somewhere. They're off somewhere because they're developing new products, and that isn't necessarily what's driving headquarters at this point in time. Now, at Apple, yes, it will be. But, you know, in other organizations, it's not as likely. There's another mindset that says our main focus has to be customer-centric. We got to keep our key customers. We got to improve our reputation, our brand. We want to be a brand name. And we got to act quickly. You know, if the customer has a problem, we have to address it fast. Let's just go in there and get it done. And I mean, my experience with a company called Nordstrom's is they're very customer centric. They'll, you know, let you even alter some of the established practices to make sure you serve your customers. So again, there are different companies that have different, what I will call overall mindsets or missions that how they identify themselves, but each unit can have some differences. And in particular, we're going to talk about this in a minute. The executive team frequently will show some of these differences. The marketing and sales people will be very much gain and keep customers. Engineering may be different, finance will be different. And sometimes the executive team is talking from their mindset and they're not thinking about the whole organization. So, you know, that can happen. There's another mindset that says, let's become seamless in the way we operate our infrastructure. Let's build wonderful systems. That's information systems, HR systems, reward systems, pay policies, you know, all these kinds of macro, how we organize. Let's make sure we got that down smoothly. No silos, no inefficiencies, no confusion over goals. Let's get it done and clear. Let's have clear accountabilities, reporting relationships, all those kinds of things. So that's a macro internal view of the company I'm going to focus on. There's another mindset that takes a look at the organization and say, let's streamline processes, let's improve quality, let's improve efficiencies, let's improve ROI. A lot of the lean work, Six Sigma work would sort of fall into this category, and there are people, this actually has come back to bite us a little bit when it came to the COVID situation where inventories were low because we had just-in-time inventory. Well, we hadn't thought about the fact what happens if we can't get shipments from overseas. There's another mindset that says, let's develop our talent, let's create high-performing culture, let's have engagement, succession planning, all that kind of stuff. And there's another mindset that says, let's not just be so focused on the immediate situation, let's look into the future, let's what are the emerging needs so we can prepare to meet them. Let's evaluate any new threats that might be coming on the horizon. Let's leverage opportunities. Let's come up with some new strategic partners or alliances. And what you do with these 6 mindsets is it covers all of the organizational focal points. You know, it's saying, hey, let's take the comprehensive look at reality. And so let me just give you on the next slide a very simple example, which is in buying a car. I will give you a personal example. I could ask what technology does it have? Does it have lane monitoring or not? What kind of audio system does it have? There's another focus that says, what is the competition and what are other people offering? Do they have great customer service? There's another focus that says, is there a dealer or service facility nearby? Can they make timely repairs? There's some people, when they look at a car, also want to ask, what's the price? What's the overall cost to operate? What's the insurance cost? What are the miles per gallon? What kind of emissions does it have? All those kinds of very quality kinds of questions. Some people will look at a car and say, is it safe? Does it got a good warranty? Kind of questions. And some people will say, okay, should I lease it or should I buy it outright? I just got married or I just bought a house. What will my needs be in 4 years? Maybe I shouldn't buy a sports car. Maybe I should buy a van or whatever else. And I will tell you my mistake. Many years ago, I bought a lovely car. It was called a Peugeot. And when I had a problem with it, I didn't think about the fact that they had to send to France to get the parts. And I will tell you that the repairs were not made in a timely fashion. So I have to collect this information before I make the trade-offs, because I may not get a safe, cheap, high new technology, stylish car all at once. I have to collect the information and then make a decision. So let's take a look at a bigger decision. The next slide. This is something called COVID. And you'll notice that the initial reaction was in the catalyzing mindset, which says, respond to the hotspots. New York City needs ventilators. Respond to essential workers. Get it done. But now we have more of a diversion, where we have some people say we should be focusing on treatments or vaccines. We have other people say, no, we should be focusing on preparing guidelines and distributing PPE. Other people say, no, let's test for the disease. Let's figure out how to reopen businesses. Other people say, let's train tracers. Other people say, hey, let's prevent so much offshore, reliance. Let's forecast what the impact's going to be on the education. I mean, I think most of us will agree that public schools did not open as smoothly as they might have done. And you can see some of the tension in our society because people are prioritizing different things. And again, I'm not going to say that one is horrible and the other's good. I'm saying that we have to look at everything and maybe figure out what we have to tackle first, but also plan for what we have to tackle next. So I'm going to just suggest on the next slide that I'm going to encourage you to learn how to detect mindsets. And detecting mindsets is much easier than you think. If I ask you what's your leadership philosophy, I can't get too much from that because everyone says they're a participative leader. Everyone says they delegate decision making down to the lowest level. Everybody says that they're very want a level of initiative and creativity. But it's very different if you start asking questions. What is your current goal? What is the challenge that you're facing now? What are the results that are most critical for you to achieve first? What are the metrics you're monitoring most closely? Is it money? Is it customers? Is it the number of patents, the number of new launches, the pipeline for pharmaceutical companies? But also the easiest question is, what can I do to help you? Because that's telling people, I'm here to help you meet your goals. And if I offer to help you meet your goals, you're probably going to tell me what I can do to do that. And then you could understand where someone else is coming from. Now, is there really a benefit to this? Is this really something I want to spend my time doing? And what I will suggest in the next slide is that there's some very practical ways to apply this. And one of them is what I call bottom line influencing. And so let me just give you a situation. You have a CEO who's going to really talk about geographic expansion. If you were regional, we've got to go national. If we're national, we want to go international. So that's the catalyzing mindset. But you have different information, and you think what's really important right now is to improve the quality of services because some of your customers are complaining and leaving because you don't have good quality. So the situation is you have to help the CEO understand that there's some other factors, but you don't usually walk up to a CEO and say to the CEO, you're wrong. So you want to start a conversation with the CEO. So my question to you would be, how would you start that conversation? And on the next slide, I'm going to give you some choices. The choices are, do you want to talk about strategic alliances, systems alignment, improve the information flow or the technology? Do you want to develop new products is what you're going to talk about, talent development? You want to talk about what I want to talk about, because I want to talk about efficiency and quality. Do I want to talk more about collaboration, expanding the customer base, or risk alignment? And so you know that your CEO is focusing on customers and expansion. Anybody want to suggest what they might want to talk about first?
Strategic alliances.
Yeah, that'd be partnerships to expand. That'd be one. And I think the other one is expanding your customer base. So I may want, if it's what's in it for me, I'll talk about efficiency and quality. But if I'm trying to work with somebody, I have to decide, create some interest and some sense that I'm listening. So I'm going to start with strategic alliances and customer base. Now, some people have told me that this is manipulation, that this is dishonest because you are making a decision in light of what they want. And what I would offer is that, to me, the definition of manipulation is when I'm hiding something, where I'm distorting something, when I'm not telling you the truth. But if I'm just saying, hey, let's start a conversation about the things you want to talk about, he's basically saying, I want to just listen to you. I want to understand where you're coming from. So it's much wiser to listen. Some people talk about the fact I have one mouth and two ears, so I should listen twice as much as I talk. Probably tonight's not a very good example of that. But what the goal here is really to say, hey, let's start exchanging information. And let me ask some questions so that I can understand where you're coming from. Do you have a specific area that you want strategic alliances? Do you have you identified a new niche for our customer base that you think is the most promising? Do you want to grow organically, which means internally that we have to improve ourselves? Or do you want to do it through a purchase, a merger, or something else? So I could ask all these questions and really understand where someone is coming from. And so that's a very different way to have a conversation. To me, this is what I will call bottom line influencing. I know I could influence through personality. I could influence through relationships. I could influence a lot of different ways. But I would offer to you that bottom line influencing has a very successful rate in terms of, and I've had many times where I was, asked, can I talk to you for a couple of minutes? They say, yeah, I got 5 minutes. But I start talking about what they want to talk about, and now I've got a half hour or more. So I will just suggest to you that being comfortable with mindsets, using that detection questions to understand where somebody is coming from is very important. Somebody mentioned Dr. Cialdini. He is a great reference for influence, but he uses mostly interpersonal influence and buzzwords. So I think everything he does is great, but I do think he has a more internal point of view toward influence than he has an external view. And I think that makes sense because historically we've been in a more stable environment. So this external shifting didn't happen as frequently as I think it's happening now. I just really believe we're in a very dynamic world and we're changing much more rapidly than ever before. So I'm going to give you guys a new slide, and I'm going to ask you to read it. It's one sentence long, and I'm going to ask you to count the number of F's in this sentence. So I'm looking for a number that reflects the number of the letter F in this sentence. Would you like to just put that in your chat file? How many F's do you see? We got 4, we got 5, 6, 6. You are a very talented group. I did this with the Newspaper Editors Association, and they told me 3. And 3 is the answer I get most often. And the reason for a 3 answer is people look at the F in finished and files and scientific, because those are the important words. And we tend to overlook the unimportant words, which is the of and the of and the of. So I do this exercise just to remind us that we quickly filter out what we consider important from the less important. And I would just like to suggest that that can be dangerous. And so I'm going to suggest to you that there's a real value in having a checklist. And I'm going to, on the next slide, I'm going to point out to you that many of us have read the very effective book, The Checklist Manifesto, which created a checklist of surgical procedures, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, 5. And this was done by a grant by the World Health Association. And they found out that introducing a surgical checklist had a tremendous impact on results. And I do this because surgeons are very talented, important, intelligent people, and they can still make a mistake by skipping over something. And we know pilots have checklists, and we know a lot of people have checklists. But this kind of checklist is a list of things that you have to do. It's step by step by step. It's a reminder checklist. What I'm going to propose to you is that there's another kind of checklist that is not a reminder checklist, but is one that is a trigger checklist. It's one that we actually start to think about. So on the next slide, we're going to have a list where we ask questions and make sure we ask questions by each mindset. And so for the inventing mindset, I just put in 2. Again, in the book, there's a whole much longer list, but what could we do if we thought there were no constraints? What is outside the box thinking as well as inside the box thinking as well as under the box thinking, which is, all sorts of creative thinking. And what's really interesting, specifically around this one, is that many of us have experienced the opportunity to do brainstorming. And I don't know about you, but brainstorming doesn't take hours. I mean, I don't need a whole day to do brainstorming. My experience with brainstorming, it's usually 5 to 15 minutes. And that's what I'm proposing in terms of critical thinking. This is not a heavy new requirement for a team to do. This can be done very quickly. And what I will suggest is it can be done if you give them a checklist of questions that creates that safe environment that helps people recognize what are the kinds of questions I need to ask. So the catalyzing, questions could be, what is the competition doing for our customers? What can we give our customers given to grow our base and our reputation, our brand name, kind of our reputation for excellence kinds of things. The developing mindset is, what are our plans, what are our schedules, what are our goals, what are our systems, what can we do with cross-level facilitation? So I am actually proposing that the role of leaders has to change. The role of leaders has been, I have all the answers. And what I'm suggesting is that the role of leaders is I have to ask all the questions. And just to be sure that we complete all 6, on the next slide, I'm going to take a look at the last 3 areas where we could ask questions. The performing mindset, what can we do to improve quality? How can we improve our processes, our cycle time? How can we improve our facility layout? All those kinds of tweaks that can get us in a better position. The protecting mindset, interesting questions. Do we have the skills and the staff we need? Do we have the level of teaming we need? What can we do to grow what can we do to grow our level of engagement? You know, and then the challenging questions about the future. What are our current assumptions that need to be validated? You know, I talked with someone who's just recently been hired in a mortgage company, and can't imagine who that is, Josh. And he mentioned that, you know, the interest rates are really low. There had been an assumption, you know, that interest rates would be much higher. And then I just read something where they're saying that interest rates are going to be low for a while. And again, a lot of people thought, no, that wouldn't be the case. But what are the present trends that might produce a new opportunity or potentially a new risk? So step back and say, you know, what are the things that we think are stable that may not be stable? And so what I'm offering to you is a way of looking at the environment in a different way. Now, there's an interesting correlation with this, and I'm just going to present this briefly on the next slide, which is to suggest that all of these mindsets correlate with the organizational life cycle. And it's really interesting. I could talk to almost everybody, and they could do forming, storming, norming. So we really know life cycle, and we know project life cycle, you know, excuse me. But we don't recognize what the organizational life cycle is. And what I will offer to you is that this is a cycle. It's a wheel. It's constantly churning. Many people approach the organizational life cycle like the human life cycle. We're born, we grow, we mature, we die. And what I'm going to offer to you is that that's not true. We can reinvent ourselves. I just heard today that IBM is going to go 100% cloud. Well, they weren't always cloud company. I remember when they produced hardware, then they went into, you know, so they've evolved. And so one of our roles in terms of mindsets is to make sure that our organizations survive, that they thrive, and they don't have to die. We shouldn't wait until something collapses before we try to rethink it. So there's a really interesting correlation. And most organizations start with birth and growth. This is the entrepreneurial life cycle. And it's very hard sometimes to get those entrepreneurs to shift into thinking about how should we structure, what are our rules and policies and accountabilities. But there are some companies, particularly NGOs, that start with mature life cycle because they're focused on their mission. And what's really interesting, I'm sure many of you work for nonprofits. They're very proud of their mission, but they don't recognize that they also have to have a profitability issue. They have to raise money, and they have to revise their mission as the groups that they're serving, their needs change. So there's a whole lot here around organizational life cycle, but I just wanted to introduce it so that you could recognize that is an interesting correlation. I use the life cycle when an executive team is really at each other's throats and they don't want to talk too much about positions. So I ask them the question, where are we in the life cycle? And then I say, well, why did you say that? I get information, why did you say that? Because they're not agreeing where they are in the life cycle. So it's an interesting way. So I'm going to suggest that we move to the next slide and just present to you a case study. What I would suggest is that there's a newly externally hired CEO who's been given the charge of improving sales and growing the company. However, when they had an executive meeting, the VP of HR says, I want to propose a salary study because we're losing a lot of salespeople. And the VP of Finance responds, no way, that's going to cost money. I'm not going to do that. You got to protect the bottom line. And the board chair of the firm, board of directors, is the firm's founder. So in this situation, what would you do? The question's on the next slide. What could you do to using situational mindsets to gain agreement? Anybody want to venture a guess? feel free just to unmute yourself.
Maybe ask them what's prompting them to suggest these ways forward.
Correct. What is the data that you're using?
I would say have a task force of people from HR and finance working towards, looking at the situation for on improving sales and growth. What can they do to help with that?
Good. I'm just going to suggest that there's also an interesting response, say, how are these all connected? If we're losing key salespeople, how do you think that might impact sales, which was the VP's growth charge? I mean, there's a connection there. But actually, this is a real situation that I worked with, and the salespeople were leaving because they had launched new products with a lower commission structure. So the salespeople said, I could sell the old stuff or I could sell the new stuff. I could get more money from selling the old stuff. Guess what they did? They sold the old stuff. And when they were penalized for not selling the new stuff, they left. So there really is, let's move ahead a slide if we could. One more, please. We could look for the win-win. What can I do? So you could do a study that's just limited to sales compensation without committing to rectifying it. You could do an external study, what other people are doing, which won't raise expectations. We just did a sales study, so I must be getting a bonus. Or the opposite, we did sales studies and we get cut. But also the other part of it is to make sure that that sales structure, commission structure or salary structure, make sure that it rewards those that are really performing. Because I think that there are many organizations where performance is not adequately rewarded. I think that sometimes leaders look at the poor performance and they're so preoccupied with that they don't look at the high performers. So we'll just leave that as an idea for you. So I got a question for you on the next slide. What are brakes for on a bicycle, let's say, or a car? Come on. It's usually, people usually answer me, it's to stop. That's basically what they're saying. But do you know that brakes were introduced, and ever since brakes have been introduced, we are going faster because we have the brakes? Cars used to go 15 miles an hour, and they thought that was unbelievably fast. Manage speeds, slow down or stop, slowing down for the curves. And what I'm saying is, when we recognize something, we could talk about what it's stopping us doing, but we could also take a look at what it's letting us do. So I'm going to do a little bit of a summary on the next slide about some things I think can help you grow mental agility. One of the things at a staff meeting is, what have you learned since our last meeting? That's a very interesting question to ask, because it's saying, I want you to learn. I want you to talk about what you're doing differently. I don't want to keep doing what we're always doing. Allocate, obviously, time for creativity and analysis, and make sure, again, that we don't make a decision without looking at the ramifications, the risks, and some of the assumptions that we're using. So again, we get excited about an idea. I get excited about situational mindsets, and we may not look at all that we need to look at. There's another aspect that we sort of tend to think of either or thinking, which means if you give me one idea, we have another idea, we just choose between those two ideas. Another requirement would be, make a requirement that we always have to come up with 3 or more options, because frequently what happens is we have one good idea, we have a straw man that we're going to knock down real fast. And then ask for analysis of what's the best case, what's the worst case, what's the likely case. Those are some ideas. I do have some more that I'd like to share with you on the next slide. I wanted to make sure that you got some practical ideas. Conduct a murder board. This is where we put up an idea, and your job is to come up with all the reasons why it's not good. Should we kill this idea? But it makes it a requirement for everyone to be creative. Some people call these red teams. There are a lot of other terms for this. but the idea that we have to all step back and say, we like this idea, but now, okay, what could go wrong? What are the assumptions we're making? I worked with an organization who wanted to introduce something brand new in accounting on December 1st. Accounting is really busy in December. You don't want to introduce something new in December, but nobody thought about what accounting wanted. So again, step back and say, hey, how will this play out? Have you ever noticed people have vision, but they don't have execution? And there's a line I like to use: vision without execution is a hallucination. And we have a lot of people out there hallucinating. Another idea, to make sure that you praise people who offer questions and new ideas, even if they're not workable. The fact is they came up with a new idea. And then obviously I'm going to propose using a situational mindset checklist to collect and evaluate current realities. I actually use, as a team activity, I actually ask the team to create that checklist, because sometimes it's a customer, sometimes it's a taxpayer, sometimes it's a patient, sometimes it's a member. And there's a lot more ownership if they tailor the checklist to their needs. So I think that there are ways to really make sure that people feel it's safe, people know how to do it. I mean, it's not like saying to somebody, I want you to be a strategic thinker. You know, that I can't transform myself. That sounds like I have to become a rocket scientist. And what I'm trying to say with this is very practical. This is immediately implementable. This is not asking me to have a rate. I don't have to be in Mensa. I don't have to be on Mahogany Row. These are things I could do at all levels, because I could tailor that checklist based on the level of the organization. So I gave you strategic kinds of questions, but really there are a lot of other levels of questions. I've done this for a insurance company call center. So, I mean, there's lots of ways that you can help people think something through, and it becomes a reminder, but it also becomes a message. So that was my attempt at a bit of a summary and making it practical. Let me just suggest on the next slide that I'd like to thank you for staying up and working long hours today. And I'd like to also see the last slide on any presentation. As you know, it is a request for any questions or comments. So does anybody have any need? Should I clarify something? Is there something that you'd like to comment on? I'd appreciate it.
Right. Well, Mary, thank you, for joining us this evening. This was completely awesome, and I'm stealing a lot of ideas. So questions or comments for Mary, feel free to either unmute and ask away or drop them in the chat.
Just curious, is that email address correct?
No, enterprise is misspelled. I'm glad someone looked at the details. Thank you. Enterprise is ENTERPRISENGT.com. Thank you for catching that.
You're welcome.
Matt, yeah, you were pausing there a little bit.
I just said you're welcome. Thank you.
Not a problem. And Mary has been generous enough to offer, if you would like a copy of a slide here or a slide there, go ahead and email her. And if you don't feel like writing down the email address, when we send out the recording link for this to everybody, we'll make sure to include her email address. So if you want to reach out to Mary for a copy of a slide or a couple slides, she said she was more than willing to do that, which is totally awesome. So thank you, Mary, for that. Questions, comments, anything else for Mary before we wrap it up and wish everyone an awesome rest of your Thursday?
So I just want to make sure somebody got at least one idea from tonight.
I like the murder board idea, but not for work.
You may want to rename it too. It actually came from police offices where they put up more information on a murder board. Well, I thank you very much for this opportunity. It was an I love the opportunity to connect, and I appreciate very much the participation. Thank you, John and Josh.
Thank you, Mary.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop the recording. Mary, again, thank you for joining us. It was